What's up, everyone? So picture this. What if that hyperactive, ramen-obsessed knucklehead we know and love got his hands on the most ridiculously overpowered ability in the Naruto universe, before he even became a chunin? I'm talking about Sage Mode here, people. This isn't your regular get stronger through training power-up. Sage Mode is straight-up cheating superhuman strength, lightning-fast reflexes, sensory abilities that let you feel a butterfly landing 3 villages over. And perfect Sage Mode, that's God-tier territory right there. So what if 12-year-old Naruto accidentally stumbled into this power during a training mishap with Jiraiya? Picture him navigating the chunin exams with abilities that could flatten mountains, all while trying to keep it secret from everyone, including his own teammates. This story's got everything: political intrigue, philosophical growth, epic battles, and that classic Naruto heart. From accidental summoning to saving Sasuke from his own darkness, it's a complete reimagining that'll blow your mind. If you're ready for this wild ride, hit that like button and let's jump in. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a shroud as Naruto Uzumaki trudged behind his senshi, already exhausted despite the early hour. 6 months of training with the legendary Sannin Jiraiya had pushed him beyond limits he never knew existed, but today felt different. The older man's usual perverted grin was replaced by an expression of focused intensity that made Naruto's stomach churn with nervous anticipation. "Iro-sennin, where exactly are we going?" Naruto called out, his voice echoing strangely in the dense woodland. "We've been walking for hours, and this place gives me the creeps." Jiraiya paused at the edge of a circular clearing, his wild white hair catching the filtered sunlight that managed to penetrate the canopy above. Ancient trees formed a perfect ring around the open space, their trunks twisted and gnarled as if shaped by some primordial force. The air itself felt thick, almost viscous, and Naruto could swear he felt something tingling against his skin. "This, my young apprentice," Jiraiya said with theatrical flourish, "is where we take your summoning training to the next level. Today, you're going to learn to summon something bigger than a tadpole." Naruto's eyes lit up with excitement, his earlier apprehension forgotten. "Really? You mean like a giant toad, one of those massive ones from your stories?" "Patience." Jiraiya's expression grew serious as he stepped into the center of the clearing. "First, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Summoning isn't just about chakra control, it's about forming a bond, a connection that transcends the physical world. And some places," he gestured to the ancient trees surrounding them, "amplify that connection." The blonde genin looked around with new interest, noticing details he'd missed before. The trees weren't just old, they were ancient, their bark covered in spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Moss grew in geometric designs across the forest floor, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of water flowing over stones, though no stream was visible. "What makes this place so special?" Naruto asked, genuinely curious now. Jiraiya began forming hand seals, his movements precise and deliberate. "Some locations are natural convergence points, places where the barriers between our world and others are thinner. The chakra here is denser, more responsive. It's the perfect place to attempt your first real summoning." As the Toad Sage completed his demonstration, a small puff of smoke appeared, revealing a scroll nearly as tall as Naruto himself. The parchment was covered in intricate symbols and signatures written in what looked suspiciously like blood. "The Toad Summoning Contract," Jiraiya announced proudly. "Sign this with your blood, and you'll be able to call upon the toads of Mount Myaboku in your time of need." Naruto approached the scroll reverently, running his fingers along the ancient parchment. Names were inscribed in a flowing script he couldn't read, but somehow the weight of history pressed down on him. This was real, not just another training exercise, but a genuine step toward becoming the shinobi he dreamed of being. Without hesitation, he bit his thumb hard enough to draw blood and signed his name with shaking fingers. The moment his blood touched the scroll, a warmth spread up his arm, and for just an instant, he could have sworn he heard distant croaking voices welcoming him. "Excellent," Jiraiya rolled up the contract and sealed it away. "Now comes the real test. I want you to channel as much chakra as you can into the summoning jutsu. Don't hold back, this place will amplify your power, so you need to put everything you have into it." Naruto nodded eagerly, already forming the familiar hand seals. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram, the sequence was burned into his muscle memory after months of practice. But as he began to gather his chakra, something strange happened. The energy didn't just flow from within him as it usually did. Instead, it seemed to draw from the very air around him, pulling in streams of power he'd never felt before. The sensation was intoxicating, like drinking lightning, and he found himself gathering far more chakra than he'd ever managed previously. "That's it," Jiraiya encouraged, though Naruto noticed a flicker of concern cross his sensei's features. "Keep going." The chakra continued to build, but something was wrong. The energy swirling around Naruto wasn't entirely his own. It felt wild, untamed, connected to something vast and ancient that had nothing to do with the nine tails sealed within him. The geometric patterns in the moss began to glow with a soft blue light, and the twisted trees creaked ominously as their bark patterns pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Iro-sennin," Naruto called out, his voice strained as he struggled to control the mounting power. Something's not right, but it was too late. The chakra had taken on a life of its own, spiraling upward in a visible column of blue-white energy that made the air itself ripple like water. Naruto slammed his palm down onto the ground, completing the summoning jutsu with more power behind it than he'd ever wielded before. The explosion of smoke that followed wasn't the small puff he expected. Instead, it erupted like a geyser, filling the entire clearing and beyond. Through the choking cloud, Naruto heard Jiraiya shouting his name, but the sound seemed to be coming from very far away. When the smoke finally cleared, Naruto found himself somewhere else entirely. He was sitting in what appeared to be a vast natural amphitheater carved from living rock, surrounded by pools of crystal-clear water that reflected a sky painted in shades of orange and purple he'd never seen before. Massive lily pads dotted the pools, each one large enough to support a house, and the air hummed with an energy that made his skin tingle pleasantly. "Well, well," a gravelly voice said behind him. "What do we have here?" Naruto spun around to find himself face to face with a toad unlike any creature from his wildest imagination. The being was roughly humanoid but clearly amphibian, standing about 4 feet tall with orange skin marked by dark spots. It wore what looked like a traditional martial arts gi, and its large, intelligent eyes studied Naruto with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Naruto managed, still trying to process what had happened. "Hi there. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I think I might be lost." The toad's expression shifted to one of surprise. "A reverse summoning? At your age?" It hopped closer, circling Naruto with obvious interest. "Most unusual." "Most unusual indeed. Tell me, young one, how exactly did you arrive here?" "I was trying to summon a toad," Naruto explained, gesturing helplessly at the alien landscape around him. "But something went wrong with the jutsu, and suddenly I was here instead of the toad being there, if that makes any sense." "More sense than you might think," the toad replied thoughtfully. "I am Fukasaku, one of the elder sages of Mount Myaboku. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, have just accomplished something that shouldn't be possible for someone of your age and training level." Before Naruto could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Pa, what's all the commotion about?" A second toad appeared, this one slightly smaller and clearly female, wearing a blue apron over her orange skin. "Oh my, we have a visitor. This is Ma," Fukasaku explained. "And this young man has just reverse summoned himself to our realm through sheer accident." Ma studied Naruto with the same intense scrutiny as her husband. "There's something unusual about his chakra signature," she observed. "It's not just the normal human energy. There's something else mixed in, something powerful and constrained." Naruto shifted uncomfortably under their combined gaze. He'd grown used to the suspicious looks that followed him around Konoha, but this felt different, more analytical than hostile. "Is that bad?" he asked. "Not bad," Fukasaku said slowly, "but certainly complicated. Tell me, do you carry within you a tailed beast?" The directness of the question caught Naruto off guard. Most adults danced around the subject of the nine tails, speaking in euphemisms and half-truths. To hear it addressed so matter-of-factly was almost refreshing. "Yeah," he admitted, "the nine-tailed fox. Has been since I was born." The two elder toads exchanged a meaningful look that Naruto couldn't interpret. Finally, Fukasaku spoke again. "That explains much. The natural energy of this place resonated with the tailed beast's chakra, amplifying your summoning beyond normal parameters. Instead of bringing one of us to your world, you pulled yourself into ours." "Natural energy?" Naruto asked, latching onto the unfamiliar term. "The life force that flows through all things," Shima explained patiently. "Most humans can't sense it, let alone use it, but in rare cases, particularly those involving individuals with unique chakra signatures." She trailed off, looking at her husband again. "You're suggesting he could learn Sage Mode?" Fukasaku asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm suggesting his accident wasn't entirely accidental," Shima replied. The natural energy here wouldn't have responded so strongly to normal human chakra, even amplified by a summoning jutsu. There's something about his energy that calls to it. Naruto looked back and forth between them, feeling lost. What's Sage Mode? Fukasaku was quiet for a long moment, studying Naruto with an intensity that made the boy fidget. Finally, he spoke. Sage Mode is the ability to harness natural energy, the life force of the world itself, and combine it with your own chakra to achieve a state of perfect balance and enhanced power. It is one of the most difficult techniques in existence, requiring not just skill but wisdom, patience, and absolute control. And it's dangerous, Shima added seriously. Those who fail to master it properly turn to stone and become one with nature permanently. It's not a technique to be learned lightly. Despite the warning, Naruto felt a spark of excitement kindle in his chest. A new kind of power, something beyond what the Nine Tails offered, something that was entirely his own. Could you teach me? Absolutely not, Fukasaku said firmly. You're far too young, and the presence of the tailed beast would complicate the training immensely. The risks, but he's already demonstrated an affinity for natural energy, Shima interrupted. And look around, Pa. The ambient energy here is responding to his presence even now. Naruto followed her gaze and gasped. The pools of water around them were glowing softly, and he could see streams of light, barely visible, like heat shimmer, flowing from the water toward him. The sensation was subtle but unmistakable, like a gentle current trying to merge with his own chakra. This is unprecedented, Fukasaku muttered, hopping closer to examine the phenomenon. In all my years, I've never seen natural energy respond so readily to an untrained individual. Please, Naruto said, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. I know I'm young and I know it's dangerous, but I want to get stronger. I need to get stronger. There are people I have to protect, and if this Sage Mode can help me do that. The Elder Toads exchanged another long look, conducting an entire conversation through expressions and subtle gestures that Naruto couldn't follow. Finally, Fukasaku sighed heavily. Even if we were willing to consider such training, and I'm not saying we are, it would require a commitment beyond anything you've experienced. Sage Mode isn't just about power. It's about understanding your place in the natural order, about achieving harmony between yourself and the world around you. Given the complications of your situation, the training would be even more challenging. I understand, Naruto said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. I'm willing to work as hard as I need to. Are you? Shima asked pointedly. Are you willing to spend weeks in meditation, learning to sense energies you've never felt before? Are you willing to face the very real possibility of death if you make a mistake? Are you willing to keep this training secret from your village, your friends, your senshi? The last point hit home harder than Naruto expected. Keeping secrets from his teammates, from Jiraiya, went against every instinct he had. But if this power could help him protect them, if that's what it takes, he said quietly. Fukasaku studied him for another long moment before nodding slowly. Very well. We will attempt a modified training regimen, one that accounts for your unique circumstances. But understand this, young Naruto, if at any point you prove unable or unwilling to meet the demands of this training, we will end it immediately. The risks are too great for anything less than complete commitment. I won't let you down, Naruto promised, feeling a mix of excitement and terror at what he'd just committed to. We shall see, Fukasaku replied. But first, we need to return you to your own world. Your senshi is probably wondering what happened to you. With a complex series of hand seals, Fukasaku began the reverse summoning that would send Naruto home. As the familiar smoke began to rise around him, Naruto called out, "When do we start?" "Tomorrow," Shima answered. Same time, same place, and Naruto not a word of this to anyone. The fewer people who know about sage training, the better. The world dissolved into smoke and spinning sensations, and Naruto found himself back in the forest clearing, face down in the dirt with Jiraiya's worried voice calling his name. "Naruto, are you all right? What happened? One moment you were completing the summoning and the next you just vanished." Naruto pushed himself up, brushing leaves from his orange jumpsuit. His mind raced as he tried to process everything that had just occurred. I think the jutsu backfired. I ended up somewhere else for a few minutes, but I'm fine now." Jiraiya's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Somewhere else. Where exactly? I'm not really sure," Naruto lied, hating how easily the deception came. "It was all pretty confusing. Maybe we should try again another day." The Toad Sage studied his apprentice carefully, clearly sensing that he wasn't getting the full story. But after a moment, he nodded. "Perhaps you're right. That was more chakra than I've ever seen you channel before. We should probably call it a day." As they walked back toward the village, Naruto's mind churned with thoughts of natural energy, sage mode, and the incredible opportunity he'd stumbled into. The path ahead would be difficult, more challenging than anything he'd ever attempted. But for the first time since beginning his training with Jiraiya, he felt like he was moving toward something truly his own. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The sun was setting by the time they reached Konoha's gates, painting the sky in shades that reminded Naruto of the alien sunset he'd witnessed at Mount Myaboku. As they passed through the village streets, he caught sight of his teammates heading home from their own training, Sasuke's dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight while Sakura walked beside him, chatting animatedly about some technique Kakashi had shown them. They looked so normal, so grounded in the world he'd always known. Part of him wanted to run over and tell them about his incredible experience, to share the excitement of discovering something completely new. But the Elder Toad's warning echoed in his mind. This had to remain secret, at least for now. "Get some rest," Jiraiya said as they reached the small apartment Naruto called home. "We'll continue your regular training tomorrow, but take it easy tonight. You've had quite enough excitement for one day." If only he knew, Naruto thought as he climbed the stairs to his front door. As he settled into bed that night, his dreams were filled with images of glowing pools, ancient trees, and the promise of power beyond anything he'd ever imagined. The real training was about to begin. Dawn broke over Konoha with the same gentle persistence it had for centuries, but for Naruto Uzumaki, this particular morning carried the weight of destiny. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with thoughts of Mount Myaboku, natural energy, and the incredible opportunity that lay before him. The events of the previous day felt almost dreamlike in their impossibility, yet the lingering sensation of that alien energy still tingled at the edges of his consciousness. Jiraiya had left early for what he claimed was research, but which Naruto suspected was actually meeting with village officials about yesterday's training incident. The Toad Sage had peppered him with questions over dinner, clearly suspicious about the gaps in Naruto's story, but had eventually let the matter drop with a warning about being more careful with experimental techniques. As the appointed time approached, Naruto found himself back in the ancient clearing, pacing nervously among the twisted trees. The geometric patterns in the moss seemed more pronounced in the morning light, and he could swear he felt that same tingling sensation he'd experienced during the summoning accident. Taking a deep breath, he formed the familiar hand seals and channeled his chakra into the summoning jutsu. This time, he was more careful about the amount of energy he drew from his surroundings, but even so, he felt that strange pull of natural energy trying to merge with his own power. The smoke cleared to reveal Fukasaku sitting calmly on a lily pad, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment. "Punctual," the Elder Toad observed approvingly. "That's a good start. You're really going to teach me?" Naruto asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm going to attempt to teach you," Fukasaku corrected. "Whether you can learn is an entirely different matter." He gestured for Naruto to sit cross-legged on the stone platform beside the pool. "First, we need to establish some ground rules." Naruto settled into position, trying to mirror the Toad's perfect posture. Despite his excitement, something in Fukasaku's tone warned him that this conversation would be more serious than he'd anticipated. "Traditional Sage Mode training takes months, sometimes years to master," Fukasaku began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "It requires absolute stillness, perfect chakra control, and most importantly, the ability to balance 3 distinct types of energy within your body simultaneously." "3 types?" Naruto asked, though he suspected he knew what the third one was. "Physical energy from your cells, spiritual energy from your mind, and natural energy from the world around you," Fukasaku explained patiently. "For most students, learning to sense and control natural energy is challenge enough. But you, young Naruto, have an additional complication." The 9 tails, Naruto had wondered when that would come up. "The tailed beast's chakra introduces a 4th variable into an already delicate equation," Fukasaku continued. "In theory, this should make Sage Mode impossible for you to learn. The conflicting energies should tear you apart from the inside." Naruto's heart sank. "Should, however," Fukasaku said, raising a webbed finger, "your accidental reverse summoning yesterday proved that theory wrong. Somehow, your chakra signature is already partially attuned to natural energy. We believe this is because the 9 tails chakra has been slowly leaking into your system since birth, creating microchannels that allow natural energy to flow more easily through your network." The explanation made Naruto's head spin, but he grasped the essential point. "So the fox's chakra actually helps. In a way, yes, but it also makes the training far more dangerous. Fukasaku's expression grew grave. If you lose control while gathering natural energy, the results won't be simple stone transformation. The interaction between natural energy and tailed beast chakra could cause unpredictable effects. Before Naruto could ask what that meant, Shima appeared beside her husband with a small puff of smoke. "Good morning, dear," she said pleasantly, as if materializing beside dimensional pools was the most natural thing in the world. "I've brought the modified training materials." She produced a small vial of golden oil that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "This is toad oil, enhanced with a stabilizing agent we've developed specifically for your situation. When applied to the skin, it will help you passively absorb natural energy while preventing the more volatile interactions with your other tenant." Naruto accepted the vial carefully, noting how warm it felt against his palm. "What exactly will this do to me?" "The oil will allow you to sense natural energy more clearly and begin the process of integration," Fukasaku explained. "However, unlike traditional training where students must learn to gather energy through meditation alone, you'll be working with a modified approach that accounts for your unique chakra signature." "Modified how?" Naruto asked, uncorking the vial to peer at the golden liquid inside. "Traditional sage mode requires absolute stillness because students must consciously draw natural energy into their bodies while maintaining perfect balance," Shima said. "Your approach will be different. Instead of actively gathering energy, you'll learn to harmonize with the natural energy that's already trying to merge with your chakra." The distinction seemed subtle, but Naruto sensed it was important. "So instead of pulling the energy in, I let it come to me?" "Precisely. But this requires a different kind of control, emotional rather than physical. Natural energy responds to the user's state of mind. Fear, anger, excitement, any strong emotion can destabilize the balance and cause the energy to run wild." Naruto thought about his usual approach to training, which generally involved throwing himself at problems with maximum enthusiasm and minimum subtlety. This was going to be a challenge. "Before we begin, you must understand the commitment you're making," Fukasaku said seriously. "This training will require you to come here every day for at least 2 hours of intensive practice. You cannot miss sessions, you cannot rush the process, and you absolutely cannot tell anyone about what you're learning." "Not even Jiraiya Senshi?" Naruto asked, though he already knew the answer. "Especially not Jiraiya," Shima said firmly. "He would feel obligated to report your training to the Hokage, and that would create complications." Naruto could imagine the kind of complications they meant. A 12-year-old Jinchuriki learning one of the most dangerous techniques in existence would probably cause panic among the village leadership. "Additionally," Fukasaku continued, "you must promise to stop immediately if we determine that the training is too dangerous to continue. No arguments, no second chances. The risks involved aren't just to you. An uncontrolled interaction between natural energy and tailed beast chakra could affect everyone around you." The weight of responsibility settled on Naruto's shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't just about getting stronger anymore, it was about protecting everyone he cared about from his own potential loss of control. "I understand," he said quietly. "I promise." Fukasaku studied him for a long moment, as if reading the sincerity in his words. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Apply the oil to your arms and face, then assume a meditation posture." Naruto poured a small amount of the golden oil into his palm, surprised by how it seemed to move with a life of its own, flowing across his skin in spiraling patterns. The moment it made contact, he gasped. Suddenly, he could see the natural energy around him. It appeared as streams of soft light flowing through the air, emanating from every living thing in the area. The ancient trees pulsed with deep, steady rhythms, while smaller plants flickered with quicker, more delicate patterns. Even the water in the pools seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. "Incredible," he whispered, watching the light streams swirl around him like visible wind. "What you're seeing is natural energy in its raw form," Fukasaku explained. "Every living thing produces it, and it flows constantly through the world around us. The goal of Sage Mode is to tap into this flow and make it part of yourself." "It's beautiful," Naruto said, genuinely awed by the light show surrounding them. "It's also deadly if mishandled," Shima warned. "Now, close your eyes and focus on feeling rather than seeing. The visual aspect is just training wheels. True sages sense natural energy through their entire being." Naruto reluctantly closed his eyes, but found that he could still sense the energy patterns even without seeing them. They felt warm and alive, like being surrounded by gentle currents in a vast ocean. "Good," Fukasaku said approvingly. Now, instead of trying to grab that energy, I want you to simply listen to it. Natural energy has its own rhythm, its own personality. Your job is to understand it, not control it. For the next hour, Naruto sat in meditation, learning to sense the ebb and flow of natural energy around him. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Where his own chakra felt familiar and controllable, natural energy was wild and free, following patterns he couldn't predict or influence. "I can feel it," he said eventually, "but every time I try to connect with it, it slips away." "That's because you're still thinking like a normal ninja," Shima observed. "You're trying to impose your will on the energy. But natural energy doesn't respond to force, it responds to harmony." "What's the difference?" "Force is taking what you want," Fukasaku explained. "Harmony is becoming part of something larger than yourself. Stop trying to grab the energy and start trying to become worthy of it." The philosophical aspect was giving Naruto a headache, but he tried to adjust his approach. Instead of reaching out for the energy, he focused on simply existing in the same space as it, letting his consciousness drift alongside the natural flows without trying to direct them. Gradually, he began to feel a subtle change. The boundary between his own chakra and the natural energy around him started to blur, creating moments where he couldn't tell where he ended and the world began. It was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. "Better," Fukasaku noted, "but I can sense tension in your chakra network. Something is fighting the integration." Naruto opened his eyes, frustrated. "The Nine Tails? Possibly. Or it could be your own instinctive resistance to the unfamiliar energy. Either way, we need to address it before proceeding further." Shima hopped closer, studying Naruto with the intensity of a master diagnostician. "Show us your normal chakra control exercises. We need to see how your energy flows naturally." Naruto demonstrated the tree walking and water walking techniques that had become second nature to him over months of training with Kakashi and Jiraiya. As he channeled chakra to his feet, both toads observed intently. "There," Fukasaku pointed to a spot just below Naruto's solar plexus. "Do you see how the energy stutters there? That's where the Nine Tails chakra mingles with your own, creating turbulence." "Can we fix it?" Naruto asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "We can work around it," Shima said thoughtfully. "But it will require a different approach than traditional sage training. Instead of trying to create perfect balance immediately, we'll need to gradually accustom your system to natural energy integration." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means your training will take longer than normal, but it also means you might eventually achieve something unique," Fukasaku explained. "A sage mode that incorporates tailed beast chakra could theoretically be more powerful than any we've seen before." The possibility was intriguing, but Naruto could see the concern in both Toad's expressions. But the risks are proportionally higher. We're essentially conducting an experiment with forces that have never been combined before. If something goes wrong..." Fukasaku trailed off meaningfully. Naruto thought about his friends, his village, and everyone counting on him to become stronger. Then he thought about the power he'd glimpsed yesterday, the incredible potential of natural energy combined with his own abilities. "I want to try," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." The elder toads exchanged one of their wordless communications before Fukasaku nodded slowly. "Very well, but we proceed with extreme caution. Your next session will focus on basic energy sensing exercises, nothing more. We need to map exactly how your chakra interacts with natural energy before attempting any kind of integration." "When should I come back?" Naruto asked, already eager for the next lesson despite the warnings. "Tomorrow, same time, and remember absolute secrecy. Not just about the training, but about Mount Myaboku itself. As far as anyone else is concerned, you spent the morning doing solo meditation exercises in the forest." As Fukasaku prepared the reverse summoning that would return Naruto to his own world, Shima placed a small cloth bundle in his hands. "Toad oil for daily practice," she explained. "Use only a few drops at a time and only when you're completely alone. If anyone asks about the smell, tell them it's a new training supplement Jiraiya gave you." The familiar smoke began to rise around him, but this time Naruto felt prepared for the transition. As Mount Myaboku faded from view, he heard Fukasaku's final words of advice. "Remember, young sage, natural energy is not something you master, it's something you learn to dance with." When the smoke cleared, Naruto found himself back in the forest clearing, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. But now he could sense something he'd never noticed before. The faint flow of natural energy through the trees and undergrowth around him, calling to him like a half-remembered song. The real training had begun, and with it, a journey that would change not just his power level, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be connected to the world around him. As he walked back toward Konoha, the small vial of toad oil warm in his pocket, Naruto felt the first stirrings of something that went beyond simple excitement. For the first time in his life, he was learning something that was truly, uniquely his own. 3 weeks had passed since Naruto's first training session at Mount Myaboku, and his daily routine had evolved into something that would have shocked his former teachers. Each morning, he rose before dawn and slipped quietly from his apartment, moving through Konoha's empty streets like a ghost. The small vial of toad oil had become his most precious possession, hidden carefully in a sealed pouch that never left his side. The clearing in the forest had become his second home, and as he arrived that morning, Naruto could sense the natural energy flowing around him even before applying the oil. His sensitivity had increased dramatically over the past weeks, though his control remained frustratingly elusive. After the now familiar summoning sequence, he found himself facing Fukasaku and Shima on the stone platform beside the glowing pools. Both toads looked more serious than usual, and Naruto felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. "We've been monitoring your progress carefully," Fukasaku began without preamble, "and while your sensitivity to natural energy has increased beyond our expectations, your control remains dangerously unstable." Naruto nodded grimly. He'd experienced the consequences of that instability firsthand over the past week, 3 separate occasions where he'd partially transformed into stone, his skin taking on the rough, gray texture of granite before Fukasaku's emergency interventions pulled him back from the brink. "Show us what you've been practicing," Shima instructed, settling herself on a lily pad where she could observe closely. Taking a deep breath, Naruto applied a few drops of the toad oil to his forearms and assumed a meditation posture. Almost immediately, the natural energy around him became visible as streams of golden light, flowing from every living thing in Mount Myaboku toward his position. At first, the integration seemed to proceed smoothly. The natural energy merged with his own chakra in gentle eddies, creating a sensation of warmth and power that made him feel more connected to the world around him than ever before. But then, as it always did, something went wrong. The energy flow suddenly spiked, drawing in far more natural power than his system could handle. Naruto felt his skin beginning to harden, starting with his fingertips and creeping up his arms like spreading ice. Panic flared in his chest, which only made the imbalance worse. "Stop!" Fukasaku commanded, striking Naruto's shoulder with surprising force. The blow disrupted the energy flow, causing the excess natural power to dissipate in a shower of golden sparks. Naruto slumped forward, breathing heavily as his skin slowly returned to its normal texture and color. "I don't understand," he gasped. "It feels right at first, but then something just breaks." "The problem isn't your technique," Shima observed, studying the lingering traces of disrupted energy around him. "It's your emotional state. Watch." She gestured toward one of the pools where the surface had been disturbed by the energy discharge. Instead of random ripples, the water showed a clear pattern, concentric circles that pulsed in rhythm with something invisible. "Natural energy responds to the user's inner harmony," Fukasaku explained. "When you're calm and centered, it flows smoothly. But the moment you experience strong emotion, excitement, fear, anger, the energy becomes turbulent." "But I was trying to stay calm," Naruto protested. "Were you?" Shima asked pointedly. "Or were you trying to prove yourself? Trying to master this technique to show us how determined you are?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Naruto had been approaching his sage training with the same intensity he brought to everything else, pushing himself to excel as quickly as possible. The idea of simply existing in harmony with the energy, rather than conquering it, went against every instinct he developed as a ninja. Traditional sage training includes months of meditation and philosophical study before students ever attempt to channel natural energy, Fukasaku continued. "We've been forcing the process because of your unique circumstances, but perhaps we need to step back and address the fundamentals." "What does that mean?" Naruto asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "It means learning to quiet your mind completely. No thoughts of becoming stronger, no desire to impress anyone, no goals beyond simply being present in the moment." Shima's expression was sympathetic but firm. "For someone with your personality, this may be the most difficult challenge you'll ever face." Over the following hour, the elder toads introduced Naruto to meditation techniques he'd never encountered before. Instead of the active focus exercises he'd learned from Jiraiya, these practices required him to empty his mind entirely. becoming a passive observer of his own thoughts and emotions. Don't try to stop thinking, Fukasaku instructed as Naruto struggled with the unfamiliar discipline. Simply notice each thought as it arises, acknowledge it, and let it pass without engaging with it. The process was maddeningly difficult. Every time Naruto thought he'd achieved the desired state of mental stillness, another thought would intrude, worries about his teammates, excitement about his progress, frustration with his failures. Each emotional spike caused the natural energy around him to fluctuate wildly, creating feedback loops that made meditation even harder. "This is impossible," he finally said after his fifth failed attempt. "My brain won't shut up." "That's not the goal," Shima corrected gently. "The goal is learning to coexist peacefully with your own thoughts and emotions. Right now you're fighting them, which creates the very turbulence that disrupts natural energy flow." "Think of it like this," Fukasaku added. "In combat, you learn to move with your opponent's attacks rather than meeting them head-on. Emotional regulation works the same way. Instead of opposing unwanted feelings, you learn to let them flow through you without being controlled by them." The analogy made more sense to Naruto than the abstract meditation concepts. He could understand the idea of redirecting force rather than resisting it, even if applying that principle to his own mind felt completely foreign. As their session continued, a new complication emerged. Naruto began to notice that his usual chakra patterns were changing in subtle but significant ways. The Ninetales' energy, normally a steady background presence, had become more active since he'd started sage training, responding to the natural energy with what felt almost like curiosity. "The tailed beast is interested in what you're learning," Fukasaku observed when Naruto mentioned this development. "That could be either very good or very dangerous." "Why would it be dangerous?" "Because tailed beasts are creatures of pure emotion and instinct. If the Ninetales becomes too invested in your sage training, its emotional state could influence your ability to maintain the balance required for natural energy integration." The implications were troubling. Naruto had worked hard to develop a stable relationship with the fox's chakra, learning to draw on its power without losing himself to its influence. The idea that sage training might disrupt that carefully maintained equilibrium was deeply concerning. "Is there a way to separate the two?" he asked hesitantly. "Not separate," Shima said thoughtfully, "but perhaps we can teach you to harmonize them. After all, the Ninetales is as much a part of the natural world as any other creature. Its energy should theoretically be compatible with natural power if properly balanced." "Theoretically," Fukasaku repeated with obvious skepticism, "but the practical application would be unprecedented. We'd essentially be developing an entirely new form of sage mode." The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. With a small puff of smoke, Jiraiya materialized on the stone platform, his expression a mixture of shock and fury that made Naruto's blood run cold. "Well, well," the Toad Sage said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is certainly interesting." For a moment, nobody moved. Naruto felt like he'd been caught stealing from the village treasury, while both elder toads maintained careful neutrality. Finally, Jiraiya spoke again. "Pa-ma, would you mind explaining why you're teaching sage mode to my student without my knowledge or permission?" "Jiraiya," Fukasaku said calmly, "the boy came to us through a reverse summoning accident. We simply provided guidance for a potentially dangerous situation." "Guidance?" Jiraiya's voice rose slightly. "You're teaching one of the most lethal techniques in existence to a 12-year-old Jinchuriki." "We're teaching him control," Shima corrected. "Something he desperately needs, given his natural affinity for energy absorption." Naruto found his voice, though it came out smaller than he'd intended. "Iro-senin, I can explain." "You can explain later," Jiraiya cut him off, though his tone was more hurt than angry. "Right now, I want to understand exactly what's been happening here." Over the next hour, the Elder Toads provided a detailed summary of Naruto's training progress, including both his achievements and his struggles. Jiraiya listened in increasingly grim silence, occasionally asking technical questions that went over Naruto's head entirely. "Show me," Jiraiya finally said to Naruto. "I want to see your current level of control." Reluctantly, Naruto went through his usual routine, applying the toad oil, entering meditation, and attempting to integrate natural energy with his own chakra. This time, however, the presence of his senshi made maintaining emotional equilibrium even more difficult. Within minutes, he felt the familiar hardening sensation as his control slipped and stone transformation began. Jiraiya's hand landed on his shoulder with practiced precision, disrupting the energy flow before the transformation could progress too far. "That's enough," he said quietly. The silence that followed was oppressive. Finally, Jiraiya spoke again. "Pa-ma, I need to speak with you privately. Naruto, wait over there." He gestured toward a distant platform. As Naruto moved out of earshot, he could see the three toads engaged in an intense discussion. Jiraiya's body language was tense, while Fukasaku and Shima remained outwardly calm but clearly defensive. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, during which Naruto alternated between fear that his training would be terminated and curiosity about what they were discussing. When he was finally called back, all three toads looked troubled but resolved. "We've reached a compromise," Jiraiya announced. "Your sage training will continue, but under modified conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Naruto asked warily. "First, I'll be present for all future sessions to monitor your safety. Second, we're going to slow down the process significantly and focus on meditation and emotional regulation before attempting any more energy integration. Third, if I determine at any point that the training has become too dangerous, it stops immediately." Naruto felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. He was glad the training would continue, but the increased oversight and slower pace felt like setbacks. "Additionally," Fukasaku added, "we're going to start incorporating specific exercises designed to help you manage the interaction between natural energy and the Nine Tails chakra. This is going to require a level of self-awareness and control that most sages never need to develop." "What does that mean, practically?" Naruto asked. "It means learning to monitor and adjust three different energy types simultaneously while maintaining perfect emotional equilibrium," Shima explained. "In other words, it means your training is about to become significantly more difficult." As if to emphasize her point, Naruto attempted one more integration exercise under Jiraiya's supervision. This time, instead of stone transformation, the imbalance caused a different kind of disruption. His own chakra began resonating with the Nine Tails energy, creating a feedback loop that made the natural energy spiral completely out of control. The discharge was visible from several platforms away. A column of golden light shot through with orange flames that dissipated only when all three toads working together managed to disrupt it. "Well," Jiraiya said dryly as the light faded, "this should be interesting." Despite the complications and setbacks, Naruto felt a renewed sense of determination as they concluded the session. The path ahead would be more challenging than he'd originally imagined, but for the first time since beginning his sage training, he felt like he had a clear understanding of what he needed to achieve. Balance not just between different types of energy, but between his own conflicting desires for power and harmony. It was a lesson that would serve him well beyond his sage training, though he didn't yet realize it. As Jiraiya prepared the reverse summoning that would take them both home, Fukasaku offered one final piece of advice. "Remember, young sage, the strongest techniques aren't always the ones that require the most force. Sometimes, true power comes from knowing when not to act." The words followed Naruto back to his own world, where the familiar sights and sounds of Konoha seemed somehow different after his morning in Mount Myaboku. His teammates and friends moved through their daily routines unaware of the incredible forces he was learning to balance. And for the first time, Naruto truly understood the weight of the secrets he carried. The real test, he realized, wouldn't just be mastering sage mode. It would be learning to live with the knowledge and responsibility that came with it. 2 months of grueling training had transformed Naruto in ways that went far beyond simple power increases. As he moved through Konoha's morning bustle, heading toward the academy for team assignments, he carried himself with a stillness that would have been unthinkable just months before. The constant meditation and emotional regulation exercises had taught him to observe his surroundings with new awareness, sensing the subtle currents of energy that flowed through every living thing. The changes hadn't gone unnoticed by his teammates. Sakura had commented on his improved focus during their recent D-rank missions, while Sasuke had grown increasingly suspicious of Naruto's sudden tactical insights and enhanced reaction times. Most concerning of all, Kakashi's single eye had begun following Naruto with the keen interest of someone who recognized hidden depth. "You're different," Sasuke said bluntly as Team 7 gathered at Training Ground 3 for what Kakashi had promised would be an important announcement. "Your chakra feels strange." Naruto forced himself to maintain the calm demeanor he'd been cultivating even as alarm bells rang in his mind. "Different how? More controlled, focused." Sasuke's dark eyes narrowed. Like you're holding something back. Before Naruto could deflect further, Kakashi arrived in his characteristic puff of smoke, though for once he was actually on time. The silver-haired Jonin studied his students with unusual seriousness before speaking. "I've recommended all three of you for the chunin exams," he announced without preamble. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Sakura gasped in excitement. Sasuke's expression sharpened with anticipation, and Naruto felt his carefully maintained equilibrium waver as a spike of excitement threatened to disrupt the natural energy he'd been unconsciously drawing from his surroundings. "The exams begin in 1 week," Kakashi continued, apparently oblivious to Naruto's internal struggle. "This will be your first opportunity to advance in rank and prove your capabilities against genin from other villages." As his teammates peppered their senshi with questions about the exam format and competition level, Naruto found himself facing an unexpected dilemma. His Sage Mode training had progressed to the point where he could maintain imperfect integration for nearly 5 minutes. Not enough for perfect Sage Mode, but more than sufficient to provide significant enhancement to his physical abilities and sensory perception. The question was whether to use it. Later that evening, after a particularly intense training session at Mount Myaboku, Naruto broached the subject with his instructors. The revelation that he would be participating in the chunin exams had sparked a lengthy discussion between Jiraiya and the Elder Toads about the wisdom of allowing a student with incomplete sage training to enter combat situations. "Your current level of control is insufficient for sustained combat applications," Fukasaku stated bluntly, settling onto his customary lily pad. "The emotional stress of battle could cause dangerous instabilities in your natural energy integration. But it would also provide practical experience that meditation alone cannot offer," Shima countered thoughtfully. "Sometimes the only way to truly test one's mastery is through real-world application." Jiraiya, who had been unusually quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "The bigger concern is exposure. If Naruto uses even imperfect Sage Mode during the exams, it will be noticed. Word will spread, and that could create complications we're not prepared to handle." "What kind of complications?" Naruto asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Political ones," Jiraiya replied grimly. "A 12-year-old Jinchuriki with sage abilities would be seen as either a tremendous asset or a terrifying threat, depending on who's doing the evaluation. Either way, it would fundamentally change how other villages view both you and Konoha." The weight of that responsibility settled on Naruto's shoulders like a physical burden. He'd been so focused on mastering the technique that he hadn't fully considered the broader implications of possessing such rare abilities at his age. "However," Fukasaku said slowly, "there may be a middle path." "What do you mean?" Naruto asked. "Your sensitivity to natural energy has increased dramatically over the past month. Even without active integration, you're passively absorbing small amounts of environmental energy, which enhances your physical capabilities and sensory awareness. These improvements would be subtle enough to avoid detection while still providing measurable advantages." Naruto considered this. It was true that his baseline abilities had improved significantly since beginning sage training. His reflexes were sharper, his stamina greater, and his awareness of his surroundings more acute. He'd been unconsciously using these enhancements during team missions and training exercises without anyone questioning their source. "So you're saying I should participate normally but keep the active Sage Mode in reserve?" he asked. "Only for true emergencies," Shima emphasized. "Life or death situations where concealment becomes secondary to survival. And if such a situation arises," Jiraiya added, "you use the minimum amount of Sage enhancement necessary to resolve the threat. No showing off, no testing your limits in front of an audience." Naruto nodded, understanding the delicate balance he would need to maintain. The chunin exams would test not just his combat abilities, but his judgment and self-control as well. Over the following week, his training regimen shifted to focus on practical applications of his enhanced capabilities. Instead of attempting full Sage Mode integration, he practiced subtle energy manipulation, drawing just enough natural power to sharpen his senses or strengthen his muscles without triggering the visible transformations associated with active Sage Mode. The results were remarkable. During a sparring session with Sasuke, Naruto found himself anticipating his teammates' attacks with unprecedented accuracy, reading the subtle shifts in chakra and body language that preceded each strike. His movements flowed with a fluid grace that seemed to surprise even himself, and his stamina during extended combat exercises far exceeded his previous limits. There, Kakashi observed after watching Naruto effortlessly dodge a complex combination attack from Sasuke. That's what I've been noticing. Your fighting style has become more intuitive. Naruto carefully maintained a puzzled expression. Intuitive? You're reading attacks before they happen, moving with economy of motion that suggests deep tactical awareness. It's like you've developed combat instincts that usually take years of experience to acquire. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Naruto's enhanced sensory abilities allowed him to perceive the flow of chakra through his opponent's bodies, effectively giving him advance warning of their intentions. Combined with his improved physical coordination, it created the impression of prescient combat awareness. Maybe I'm just getting better at paying attention, he suggested weakly. Kakashi's single eye narrowed skeptically, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he spent the remainder of their training session testing Naruto's limits, pushing him through increasingly complex scenarios designed to reveal the source of his improvement. By the end of the week, Naruto had developed a reasonably convincing explanation for his enhanced abilities. Intensive solo training focused on meditation and awareness exercises, inspired by his experiences with Jiraiya. It wasn't entirely untrue, and it provided sufficient cover for the more obvious manifestations of his sage training. The night before the chunin exams began, Naruto sat alone on his apartment balcony, watching the moon rise over Konoha's rooftops. The village below pulsed with life energy that he could sense even without actively channeling natural power. The collective heartbeat of thousands of people going about their evening routines. For the first time since beginning his sage training, he truly understood what Fukasaku had meant about becoming part of something larger than himself. The boundaries between his own energy and the natural world had blurred to the point where he sometimes forgot where he ended and his environment began. It was a profound and slightly frightening realization. A soft knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. He opened it to find Orochimaru standing in the hallway, carrying a small bag of takeout ramen. "Thought you might be too nervous to cook," his former academy teacher said with a warm smile. "Mind if I come in?" They ate together in comfortable silence, watching the village lights twinkle below. Finally, Orochimaru spoke. "You know, when you first graduated from the academy, I worried about how you'd handle the responsibilities of being a shinobi. You had so much energy, so much enthusiasm, but not always the best judgment about when to use them." Naruto winced slightly at the accurate assessment of his former self. "But lately," Orochimaru continued, "you've seemed more centered, more aware of the consequences of your actions. It's good to see that kind of growth." "Thanks, Orochimaru," Naruto said quietly. "That means a lot." After Orochimaru left, Naruto returned to his balcony and continued his quiet observation of the village below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the constant pressure of maintaining his carefully constructed secrets. But tonight, surrounded by the gentle flow of natural energy and the comforting presence of his sleeping neighbors, he felt ready. The chunin exams would test more than just his ninja skills. They would test his ability to balance power with responsibility, ambition with wisdom, and his own desires with the greater good of those he'd sworn to protect. As he prepared for bed, Naruto caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror. His reflection showed the same orange jumpsuit and wild blonde hair as always, but his eyes held a depth and awareness that hadn't been there months before. He looked like someone who carried secrets, important ones that weighed on him in ways both challenging and strengthening. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new phase in his journey, one that would require every ounce of the patience, control, and wisdom his sage training had taught him. But as he settled into sleep, surrounded by the subtle currents of natural energy that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, Naruto felt confident that he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The real test was about to begin. The second phase of the chunin exams began with a tension that seemed to permeate the very air of the Forest of Death. As Team 7 stood at the entrance to Training Ground 44, Naruto found himself unconsciously drawing in natural energy from the ancient trees and rich soil around them. The forest pulsed with life force unlike anything he'd experienced in the village, wild, untamed, and incredibly abundant. "Remember," Anko Mitarashi called out to the assembled genin teams, her voice carrying easily across the clearing, "you have 5 days to reach the tower with both scrolls. Any team that fails to arrive with the Earth and Heaven scrolls within that time will be disqualified. Death waivers have been signed, so don't expect us to come running if things get dangerous." Naruto felt Sasuke tense beside him, the Uchiha's chakra spiking with anticipation and barely contained excitement. On his other side, Sakura was running through their planned strategies, her lips moving silently as she rehearsed the formations they'd practiced. What none of them could have predicted was the presence already waiting for them in the forest's depths. 3 hours into the exam, as Team 7 moved cautiously through the undergrowth in search of another team to target, the forest around them suddenly fell silent. No bird calls, no insect buzz, no rustle of small animals moving through the leaves. The absence of sound was so complete it felt oppressive. "Something's wrong," Naruto whispered, his enhanced senses screaming warnings that he couldn't fully explain to his teammates. The natural energy in the area had shifted, becoming chaotic and dark in a way that made his skin crawl. "I know," Sasuke replied quietly, his Sharingan spinning to life as he scanned their surroundings. "We're being watched." That's when the killing intent hit them. It washed over the forest like a physical wave, so intense and malevolent that Sakura immediately collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Sasuke staggered but remained standing, his Sharingan spinning faster as he tried to locate the source of the overwhelming pressure. Naruto, however, found that his sage training allowed him to process the sensation differently than his teammates. The killing intent was powerful, more intense than anything he'd ever experienced. But his meditation training had taught him to observe his own fear responses without being paralyzed by them. More importantly, his enhanced sensitivity to natural energy allowed him to trace the malevolent chakra signature to its source. The pale figure that emerged from behind a massive tree trunk was something out of nightmares. Golden eyes with slitted pupils, porcelain skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and an aura of barely restrained power that made the air itself feel thick and oppressive. Well, the figure said, voice carrying a sibilant quality that sent chills down Naruto's spine. "What interesting specimens we have here, Orochimaru." Even without prior knowledge, Naruto's instincts screamed that this was a predator unlike anything they'd ever faced. The natural energy around the Sannin felt wrong, corrupted somehow, as if his very presence poisoned the life force of the forest. "The Sharingan," Orochimaru continued, his golden gaze fixed on Sasuke with an intensity that made the young Uchiha take an involuntary step backward. "Such beautiful eyes, I simply must have them." Before anyone could react, Orochimaru's neck extended like a snake, his mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal fangs dripping with some kind of venomous substance. The attack was aimed directly at Sasuke, who was still struggling to overcome the paralyzing effects of the killing intent. Naruto moved without conscious thought. In the space between heartbeats, he drew on every technique his sage training had taught him. Not full sage mode. The situation was too sudden and chaotic for the careful energy balance that required, but a desperate surge of natural energy integration that pushed his physical capabilities far beyond normal human limits. Time seemed to slow as he intercepted Orochimaru's strike, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge the initial bite while simultaneously forming hand seals at superhuman speed. The shadow clone jutsu that followed created not just a few duplicates, but dozens of them, each one enhanced by the natural energy flowing through his system. The clones attacked from every angle, their movements coordinated with a precision that surprised even Naruto himself. But Orochimaru was a Sannin, and even enhanced clones were no match for his experience and power. Within seconds, every duplicate had been destroyed, leaving only wisps of smoke and the acrid smell of discharged chakra. "Interesting," Orochimaru hissed, his attention now fully focused on Naruto. "That wasn't normal clone technique. Your movements, your speed, there's something different about you, boy." Naruto felt his heart racing, both from the exertion and from the realization of how badly he'd miscalculated. Drawing on natural energy in combat was far more difficult than his controlled training sessions had led him to believe, and the presence of such a powerful opponent made maintaining any kind of energy balance nearly impossible. "Naruto," Sakura's voice cut through his internal panic. "Behind you." Orochimaru had moved again, this time appearing directly behind Naruto with speed that defied physics. Those terrifying fangs descended toward his neck, carrying what Naruto somehow knew was more than just poison, some kind of cursed marking that would fundamentally alter whoever received it. In that moment of absolute crisis, with no time for careful energy manipulation or measured responses, Naruto did something that would have horrified his instructors at Mount Myaboku. He pulled on every source of power available to him simultaneously, his own chakra, natural energy from the environment, and even a small amount of the Nine Tails' power. The result was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Instead of the familiar orange chakra cloak that usually accompanied access to the fox's power, a golden aura erupted around him, shot through with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living calligraphy. His eyes changed, taking on the horizontal bar pupils characteristic of Sage Mode, but maintaining their usual blue color rather than the orange typically associated with the transformation. More importantly, his sensory abilities expanded explosively. He could feel the location and intent of every living thing within a 100-meter radius, from the smallest insects hiding in the tree bark to the corrupted chakra signature of his opponent. The enhanced awareness allowed him to dodge Orochimaru's attack with fluid grace, spinning away from the descending fangs and landing in a combat stance that felt both familiar and completely new. "What are you?" Orochimaru whispered, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and genuine surprise. The question hung in the air as Naruto struggled to process what had just happened to him. The power coursing through his system felt incredible, far beyond anything his training had prepared him for, but it was also terrifyingly unstable. He could sense the 3 different energy types warring within his chakra network, threatening to tear him apart from the inside if he couldn't regain control. "Sasuke," he said without taking his eyes off Orochimaru, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the forest around them, "Get Sakura and run." "Now, I'm not leaving you to fight this monster alone," Sasuke replied, though his voice shook with the effort of speaking while under the influence of such intense killing intent. "You're not equipped for this," Naruto said, and the truth of that statement cut deeper than any physical wound. His training, his secrets, his careful balance of multiple power sources, all of it had led to this moment where he stood alone against a threat his teammates couldn't even comprehend. Orochimaru struck again, this time with techniques that went far beyond simple physical attacks. Serpents erupted from his sleeves, each one moving with independent intelligence and venomous fangs that dripped with the same cursed energy Naruto had sensed before. The attacks came from multiple angles simultaneously, requiring the kind of 3-dimensional combat awareness that normal genin simply didn't possess. But Naruto's improvised Sage Mode enhancement allowed him to meet each strike with precision that bordered on prescience. He could see the flow of chakra through each summoned snake, predicting their movements before they occurred. More than that, his connection to the natural energy of the forest itself seemed to give him insights into the battlefield that went beyond normal sensory perception. The fight that followed was unlike anything that should have been possible between a genin and a sannin. Naruto found himself moving with fluid grace, redirecting attacks rather than meeting them directly, using the environment itself as a weapon in ways that his regular training had never encompassed. Trees became shields and launching platforms, the very ground beneath his feet seemed to provide stability and momentum when needed. But the strain was enormous. Each second of maintaining the unstable power balance sent jolts of pain through his chakra network, and he could feel his control beginning to slip. The natural energy was becoming harder to harmonize with his other power sources, while the Nine-Tails chakra grew increasingly agitated by the foreign energy mixing with its own. "Impressive," Orochimaru said as they broke apart after a particularly intense exchange, but ultimately futile. "Your power is remarkable for one so young, but it's clearly unstable. How long can you maintain this transformation before it tears you apart?" The question was more accurate than Naruto wanted to admit. He could already feel hairline cracks forming in his chakra network, the result of forcing 3 incompatible energy types to work together without proper preparation or control. That's when Sasuke made his move. The young Uchiha had spent the fight observing, analyzing, and gathering his courage. When he finally acted, it was with the desperate precision of someone who refused to watch his teammate face impossible odds alone. His attack was perfectly timed and executed, a combination of shuriken work and fire jutsu that should have been beyond a genin's capabilities. It wasn't enough to defeat Orochimaru, but it was enough to distract him for the crucial few seconds Naruto needed to make a decision that would haunt him for months to come. Instead of continuing to fight, instead of pushing his unstable powers even further, Naruto chose retreat. The golden aura around him flickered and died as he deliberately released the dangerous energy balance, accepting the crushing fatigue that followed in exchange for preserving what remained of his chakra network. "Clever boy," Orochimaru hissed, but his attention had already shifted back to Sasuke. "But the Uchiha is still here, and he's the one I truly want." What followed was a nightmare of speed, power, and malevolent intent that left Sasuke marked with a curse seal and Team 7 traumatized in ways that would take months to fully process. But Naruto's brief activation of his hybrid power state had changed something fundamental about the encounter. Orochimaru had seen enough to know that the blonde genin was far more than he appeared to be, and the implications of that knowledge would ripple outward in ways none of them could predict. More immediately, both Sasuke and Sakura had witnessed abilities that couldn't be explained by normal ninja training, raising questions that Naruto wasn't prepared to answer. As they made camp that night, huddled around a small fire while Sasuke struggled with the pain and fever that accompanied his new curse mark, Sakura finally asked the question Naruto had been dreading. What was that golden aura? I've never seen anything like it, and it definitely wasn't the Nine Tails chakra. Naruto stared into the flames, considering his options. The truth would require explaining months of secret training, the existence of Mount Myaboku, and techniques that most people considered mythical. But the alternative was letting his teammates face future dangers without understanding the full scope of what they might encounter. It's complicated, he said finally, and dangerous to know about. More dangerous than not knowing, Sasuke asked, his voice strained but determined despite the curse mark's influence. Looking at his teammates, at the trust in their eyes despite everything they'd been through, Naruto made a decision that would change the trajectory of their relationship forever. There are some things I haven't told you, he began, choosing his words carefully. About my training, about what I've been learning. The explanation that followed was necessarily incomplete, but it laid the groundwork for a new dynamic within Team 7, one based on shared secrets and mutual trust in the face of threats that went far beyond what normal genin should ever encounter. As the fire burned low and his teammates processed the reality of Sage Mode training and natural energy manipulation, Naruto found himself facing a question that would define his path forward. How do you balance the responsibilities of power with the bonds of friendship when both are constantly pulling you in different directions? The answer, he suspected, would require wisdom that went far beyond anything his sage training had taught him thus far. The aftermath of the Forest of Death encounter left Team 7 fundamentally changed in ways that went beyond Sasuke's curse mark or their advancement to the tournament finals. As they recuperated in Konoha Hospital, the air between them carried a weight of unspoken truths and dangerous knowledge that none of them were entirely prepared to handle. Naruto sat cross-legged on his hospital bed, having been admitted more for observation than actual injury, though the strain of his improvised Sage Mode activation had left his chakra network feeling raw and oversensitive. Every few minutes, he caught himself unconsciously drawing in trace amounts of natural energy from the plants outside his window, a habit that had become so ingrained he barely noticed it anymore. The golden aura, Sakura said quietly from the visitor's chair beside his bed, her voice barely above a whisper despite the privacy seals Kakashi had placed around the room. I've been researching it in the hospital's medical library, but there's nothing that matches what we saw. That's because it's not something you'll find in normal records, Naruto replied, his voice carrying a gravity that still surprised his teammates. The boy who had once proclaimed his ambitions to the world now spoke of his most powerful abilities in hushed tones, understanding instinctively that some knowledge was too dangerous to share openly. Sasuke, propped up in the adjacent bed with his curse mark bandaged and sealed, fixed Naruto with an intense stare. You said it was related to your training with Jiraiya, but I've seen the Toad Sage fight. What you did was completely different. Different teachers, Naruto said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood the political implications of what he was revealing. Jiraiya Senshi teaches me regular ninja techniques. The Sage Mode training comes from elsewhere. Mount Myaboku, Kakashi said from his position by the window, his single eye reflecting a knowledge that made Naruto's stomach clench with apprehension. The realm of the Toad Sages. The silence that followed was pregnant with implication. Kakashi's recognition of the source meant that their secret was no longer entirely their own, and the ripple effects of that revelation would extend far beyond their small team. How long have you known? Naruto asked, though part of him had suspected their senshi would eventually piece together the truth. I've had suspicions for weeks, Kakashi admitted, pulling a chair closer to Naruto's bed. Your combat instincts improved too rapidly for normal training, your sensory abilities became too acute, and your chakra signature developed harmonics that shouldn't exist in someone your age. When Orochimaru mentioned sensing something unusual about you, those suspicions became certainties. "Are you going to report it to the Hokage?" Sakura asked, her medical training making her acutely aware of the political ramifications of a Jinchuriki with sage abilities. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment, his visible eye studying each of his students in turn. "That depends," he said finally, "on whether this training is making you stronger or putting you in greater danger." "Both," Naruto answered honestly. "The power is real, you saw what I could do against Orochimaru. But the risks—" He gestured to his bandaged arms, where the aftereffects of forcing incompatible energy types together had left subtle but persistent damage to his chakra pathways. "Explain," Kakashi commanded, his tone shifting into full Jonin mode. "Everything, from the beginning." Over the next hour, Naruto provided a comprehensive account of his Sage Mode training, carefully omitting only the most sensitive details about the Nine Tails' involvement in his energy manipulation. His teammates listened with growing amazement and concern as he described the dangers of natural energy integration, the philosophical requirements of Sage training, and the modifications necessary to accommodate his unique circumstances. "So when you fought Orochimaru," Sasuke said slowly, processing the implications, "you were essentially using an incomplete technique that could have killed you." "Or worse," Naruto admitted. "Fukasaku-senshi warned me that mixing natural energy with the Nine Tails chakra could create unpredictable effects. I got lucky that it enhanced my abilities rather than, well, exploding." "Luck," Kakashi repeated dryly, "is not a reliable foundation for combat strategy." "Which is why the training continues," a familiar gravelly voice said from the doorway. Fukasaku materialized on the windowsill in a small puff of smoke, his appearance causing Sakura to stifle a gasp of surprise. "Though recent events have made it clear that some modifications to our approach are necessary." The Elder Toad's arrival shifted the dynamic in the room immediately. This was no longer just a discussion between a team and their senshi. It was a formal consultation involving one of the legendary instructors from Mount Myaboku, with all the weight and authority that entailed. "Fukasaku-sama," Kakashi said respectfully, inclining his head toward the small toad. "I assume you're here about Naruto's performance in the forest." "Among other things," Fukasaku replied, hopping onto Naruto's bedside table where he could address the entire group. The integration of 3 energy types that young Naruto achieved should have been impossible given his current level of training. The fact that he survived it intact suggests either remarkable natural talent or extraordinary luck. "Or both," Shima's voice added as she appeared beside her husband. "Hello, dears, we've been having quite the discussion about our young student." Naruto felt his heart sink as both Elder Toads fixed him with expressions of mixed pride and concern. "How much trouble am I in?" "That depends on how willing you are to accelerate your training schedule," Fukasaku said seriously. "Your improvised technique during the encounter with Orochimaru proved that you have the potential to achieve full Sage Mode, but it also demonstrated that your current level of control is insufficient for combat applications." "What does that mean, exactly?" Sakura asked, her medical training making her naturally curious about the physiological aspects of Sage Mode. "It means that Naruto's body has adapted to natural energy integration more rapidly than we anticipated," Shima explained patiently. "His chakra network has begun forming new pathways specifically designed to handle Senjutsu chakra, but the process is incomplete. Without proper guidance, these adaptations could become permanent in ways that might be problematic." "Problematic how?" Kakashi asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Sage Mode isn't just a technique, it's a fundamental alteration to how the user interacts with the natural world," Fukasaku said gravely. "In Naruto's case, his unique circumstances have accelerated this process beyond normal parameters. If we don't provide proper guidance, he could become permanently dependent on natural energy integration, losing the ability to function normally without it." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a physical weight. Naruto had always been different due to the Nine Tails, but the idea of becoming fundamentally altered by his Sage training introduced complications that none of them had fully considered. "On the other hand," Shima continued, her tone becoming more optimistic, "if we can guide the process properly, Naruto could achieve a level of Sage mastery that's unprecedented. The combination of tailed beast chakra and natural energy, properly balanced, could create abilities that go far beyond traditional Sage Mode." "Such as?" Naruto asked, curiosity overriding his apprehension. "Extended duration, enhanced sensory range, and the ability to share natural energy with others," Fukasaku listed. Additionally, your unique energy signature could allow you to sense and potentially counter other forms of enhanced chakra, including curse marks like the one affecting your teammate. Sasuke's attention sharpened immediately. You're saying Naruto might be able to help with this? He gestured to his bandaged shoulder where the curse mark lay sealed but still pulsing with dark energy. Potentially, Shima said carefully. But such applications would require perfect mastery of Sage Mode, along with understanding of energy manipulation that typically takes years to develop. How long? Kakashi asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Under normal circumstances, 5 to 10 years of intensive training, Fukasaku replied honestly. However, given Naruto's accelerated adaptation and the unique pressures of his situation, we believe we can compress that timeline significantly. How significantly? 6 months to achieve stable Sage Mode, another year to master advanced applications. The Elder Toad's expression was grave. But this would require abandoning the cautious approach we've been taking in favor of intensive, high-risk training that would consume most of Naruto's time and energy. Naruto looked around the room, reading the expressions of his teammates and Senshi. Sakura appeared fascinated but concerned. Sasuke seemed torn between hope and jealousy, and Kakashi radiated the careful neutrality of someone calculating political ramifications. What does this mean for the chunin exam finals? Naruto asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. It means you'll have capabilities that could fundamentally alter the tournament's outcome, Kakashi said slowly, which raises questions about fairness, revelation of village secrets, and political implications we're not prepared to handle. Unless, Fukasaku interjected thoughtfully, we approach this as an opportunity rather than a complication. Opportunity for what? To demonstrate that Konoha possesses capabilities that other villages should be wary of provoking, Shima said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A young sage could serve as quite the deterrent to potential aggressors, particularly if his abilities are revealed gradually and strategically. The political chess game implicit in her suggestion made Naruto's head spin. He'd entered sage training simply wanting to become stronger, but the reality was proving to be far more complex than he'd ever imagined. I need to think about this, he said finally. All of it. The training, the risks, the political stuff, it's a lot to process. Of course, Fukasaku said understandingly, but understand that time is a factor. Your chakra network is already adapting. If we don't guide the process actively, it will continue on its own, potentially in directions we can't predict or control. As the Elder Toads prepared to depart, Shima offered one final piece of advice. Remember, dear, power without wisdom is more dangerous than no power at all. Whatever you decide, make sure it's for the right reasons. After they left, Team 7 sat in contemplative silence, each processing the weight of what they'd learned. Finally, Sasuke spoke. You realize this changes everything between us. Does it have to? Naruto asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. You're learning techniques that could make you one of the most powerful ninja in the village, Sasuke replied, his voice carrying undertones of the competitive drive that defined him. While I'm stuck with this curse mark that I can barely control. The curse mark is power too, Sakura pointed out, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with that reality. Borrowed power, Sasuke corrected. Power that comes with a price I don't fully understand. What Naruto's learning, that's earned strength, real strength. The distinction cut deeper than any physical wound. Naruto had worked for his abilities, trained for them, accepted their risks and responsibilities. Sasuke's power had been forced on him by an enemy, carrying implications and costs that none of them could fully predict. It doesn't change who we are to each other, Naruto said quietly. We're still teammates. Still friends, are we? Sasuke asked, his question hanging in the air like a challenge. The answer to that question would define not just their relationship, but the entire trajectory of Team 7's future. As the sun set outside the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Naruto found himself facing choices that would echo far beyond the upcoming tournament finals. The path of the sage was proving to be more complex than he'd ever imagined, and the true test of his wisdom would be in how he chose to walk it. The month between the preliminary rounds and the chunin exam finals had transformed Naruto in ways that went far beyond simple power increases. Under the accelerated training regimen devised by Fukasaku and monitored closely by Jiraiya, he had achieved something unprecedented: stable integration of natural energy without the dangerous spikes that had characterized his earlier attempts. Standing in the arena tunnel beneath the crowded stadium, Naruto could feel the excitement and anticipation of thousands of spectators pressing down on him like a physical weight. But where such pressure would once have made him more reckless and loud, his sage training had taught him to process these external influences with calm awareness. "Remember what we discussed," Kakashi said quietly, his single eye studying his student with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "Show improvement but not transformation. Enhancement, not revolution." Naruto nodded, his expression carrying a seriousness that would have shocked his academy classmates. The political implications of his abilities had become increasingly clear over the past month as various village representatives arrived for the finals. Too much power displayed too openly could shift the delicate balance between nations in ways that Konoha wasn't prepared to handle. His first match was against Neji Hyuga, and as he walked onto the sun-baked arena floor, Naruto found himself genuinely curious about how his enhanced capabilities would interact with the Byakugan's ability to see chakra flow directly. "Naruto Uzumaki," Neji said with his characteristic cold politeness, "I must admit I'm curious to see what improvements you've made since the preliminaries." "You might be surprised," Naruto replied, settling into a combat stance that looked deceptively casual but incorporated principles of balance and energy flow that his sage training had made second nature. As the proctor called for the match to begin, Naruto made a conscious decision that would define not just this fight, but his entire approach to revealing his abilities. Instead of hiding his sage-enhanced capabilities completely, he would demonstrate them subtly, allowing just enough improvement to show growth while keeping the true scope of his transformation hidden. The first exchange of blows revealed the extent of his development immediately. Where Naruto's usual fighting style relied on overwhelming numbers of shadow clones and straightforward attacks, he now moved with fluid precision that seemed to anticipate Neji's techniques before they were fully executed. "Interesting," Neji observed as his initial combination attack was deflected with minimal effort. "Your taijutsu has improved significantly." What Neji couldn't see, what none of the spectators could understand, was that Naruto was reading the flow of chakra through his opponent's body with sensitivity that bordered on precognition. The gentle activation of his sage-enhanced senses allowed him to perceive the minute changes in chakra flow that preceded each technique, giving him what appeared to be supernatural reaction time. 8 trigrams 64 palms, Neji called out, launching into his clan's signature technique with speed and precision that would have overwhelmed most genin. But Naruto wasn't most genin anymore. Drawing on the enhanced physical coordination that came with natural energy integration, he flowed between the strikes like water around stones, his movements so fluid they seemed almost choreographed. "Impossible," someone in the stands whispered, though Naruto's enhanced hearing picked up the comment clearly. How is he dodging the 64 palms? The answer was knowledge that Naruto couldn't share. His sage training had taught him to move in harmony with the energy around him rather than fighting against it. Neji's attacks, while fast and precise, followed predictable patterns that Naruto could read through his enhanced sensory abilities. "You've been hiding your true capabilities," Neji said as they broke apart, his Byakugan spinning as he tried to understand what he was seeing. "Your chakra flow is unusual." Naruto allowed himself a small smile. If Neji thought this was his true capability, the Hyuga prodigy was in for quite a surprise. But he had to be careful, showing too much too quickly would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. "I've been training," he said simply, which was perhaps the greatest understatement of his life. The fight continued with Naruto demonstrating enhanced speed, improved reflexes, and tactical awareness that left the audience murmuring in amazement. But he was careful to present these improvements as the result of intense physical training rather than the fundamental transformation they actually represented. When Neji launched into his philosophical discourse about fate and predetermined destiny, Naruto found himself responding with insights that surprised even himself. "You say fate determines everything," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena, "but what if fate is just another word for the choices we make when we think no one's watching?" The words came from months of meditation and philosophical study with the Elder Toads, concepts about harmony and balance that had become integral to his understanding of natural energy. But to the audience, they sounded like the hard-won wisdom of someone who had struggled against his own predetermined circumstances. "You think your suffering makes you wise," Neji replied, settling into the stance for his ultimate technique. "Let me show you the absolute power of fate. 8 trigrams, 128 palms." The technique was faster and more brutal than anything Neji had demonstrated previously, each strike aimed at critical chakra points with surgical precision. For a normal genin, it would have meant certain defeat and possible permanent injury. But Naruto's response demonstrated just how far his training had progressed. Instead of trying to dodge every strike, an impossible task even with his enhanced abilities, he did something that shocked everyone watching. He began to redirect the attacks, using principles from his sage training to turn Neji's own momentum against him. Each palm strike that should have sealed a chakra point instead found itself guided past its target. The force dispersed and redirected in ways that followed the natural flow of energy rather than opposing it directly. It was a practical application of the harmony principles that Fukasaku had spent months drilling into him. What is he doing? Someone in the Kage booth demanded, though Naruto was too focused on the fight to identify the speaker. He's not fighting the technique, Kakashi observed quietly, his voice carrying the amazement of someone who understood the skill level required for such a display. He's redirecting it. The end result was that Neji's ultimate technique not only failed to defeat Naruto, but actually left the Hyuga prodigy overextended and vulnerable. Naruto's counterattack, a single, precisely placed palm strike that he'd learned from watching Neji's own techniques, struck a pressure point that temporarily disrupted his opponent's chakra flow without causing permanent damage. As Neji collapsed, more from shock and chakra exhaustion than physical injury, Naruto found himself facing a crowd that had fallen completely silent. The display of skill they just witnessed went far beyond what anyone expected from a genin, even one known for surprising people. The winner, the proctor announced after confirming that Neji was unable to continue, Naruto Uzumaki. But instead of his usual celebration, Naruto simply helped Neji to his feet, his expression carrying the kind of compassionate understanding that his sage training had cultivated. "Fate isn't about what happens to us," he said quietly, his words meant for Neji but carrying clearly in the stadium's silence. "It's about how we choose to respond to what happens to us." As he walked back toward the contestant area, Naruto could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes following him. Some carried curiosity, others suspicion, and more than a few held the kind of calculating interest that made his stomach clench with apprehension. Kakashi met him at the tunnel entrance, his single eye reflecting pride mixed with concern. "That was well done," his senshi said quietly, "but you realize you've just painted a target on yourself that extends far beyond this tournament." Naruto nodded, understanding the implications. His careful display of enhanced abilities had achieved its intended goal, demonstrating growth without revealing his true capabilities. But it had also marked him as someone worth watching, studying, and potentially eliminating. "The other matches should be interesting," he replied, settling in to observe his remaining opponents with senses that could detect far more than any normal spectator would notice. As Sasuke's fight began in the arena below, Naruto found himself torn between pride in his teammates' own growth and concern about the growing gap between their abilities. The curse mark's influence was clearly visible to his enhanced senses, a dark energy that twisted and corrupted everything it touched. More troubling was his growing awareness of other unusual chakra signatures in the stadium. The Kasuke's energy felt wrong in ways that made his skin crawl, while several spectators carried the telltale signs of transformation techniques that his natural energy sensitivity could penetrate. Something was building toward a confrontation that would test more than just his combat abilities. As he watched Sasuke struggle with the curse mark's influence during his match, Naruto realized that the real challenges of being a sage extended far beyond mastering natural energy integration. The wisdom to know when to act, when to reveal his capabilities, and when to protect others from the consequences of his power. These were lessons that no amount of training could fully prepare him for. But as the tournament continued around him, with each match revealing new layers of political complexity and hidden agendas, Naruto felt the quiet confidence that came from knowing he possessed capabilities that could make a difference when it truly mattered. The question was whether he would have the wisdom to use them properly when that moment arrived. The subtle vibrations running through the stadium floor were imperceptible to most spectators, but Naruto's enhanced sensory abilities picked them up immediately, a rhythmic pulse that suggested coordinated movement beneath the arena. As Sasuke's match against Gaara progressed in the center of the field, Naruto found himself increasingly alert to disturbances that his teammates and even Kakashi seemed unable to detect. "Something's wrong," he whispered to Shikamaru, who was sitting beside him in the contestant area. The shadow user's tactical mind had always impressed Naruto, and his sage training had taught him to value multiple perspectives when assessing threats. "Define wrong," Shikamaru replied quietly, though his posture indicated he was already on edge. "Because I count at least 12 things about this situation that don't add up." Before Naruto could elaborate, the feathers began falling. The genjutsu was subtle, designed to lull the civilian population into unconsciousness while leaving the shinobi audience vulnerable to the real attack. But Naruto's natural energy sensitivity allowed him to perceive the technique's structure in ways that normal chakra-based detection couldn't match. "Sleep technique," he hissed, grabbing Shikamaru's shoulder and channeling a small pulse of natural energy to disrupt the genjutsu's hold on his friend. "Don't look at the feathers." Around them, civilians and lower-ranked ninja began slumping in their seats as the mass sleep jutsu took hold. But in the Kage box above, Naruto's enhanced senses detected something that made his blood run cold. The Kasuke's chakra signature was completely wrong, carrying the same corrupted energy he'd sensed from Orochimaru in the Forest of Death. The invasion began with explosive tags detonating throughout the stadium, creating chaos and panic as masked sound ninja materialized among the crowd. But what caught Naruto's attention was the coordinated precision of the attack. This wasn't random destruction. It was a carefully planned operation designed to maximize casualties while achieving specific tactical objectives. "Kakashi Senshi," Naruto called out as their Jonin instructor appeared beside them in a swirl of leaves. "The Kasuke is—" "I know," Kakashi interrupted grimly, his Sharingan already spinning as he assessed the situation. "Orochimaru, this entire exam was a setup." The realization hit Naruto like a physical blow. All their careful planning about revealing his abilities gradually, all the political considerations about demonstrating Konoha's strength, none of it mattered now. The village was under attack and people were going to die if he held back. "What are our orders?" he asked, his voice carrying the calm certainty that his sage training had cultivated. "Protect the civilians and support the defense forces," Kakashi replied, then paused as he truly looked at his student for the first time. "Naruto, whatever capabilities you've been keeping in reserve, now would be the time to use them." The permission was all Naruto needed. As chaos erupted around them, an enemy ninja began systematically attacking fleeing spectators. He made a decision that would fundamentally alter how the shinobi world viewed both him and Konoha. Dropping into the meditation stance that had become second nature over months of training, Naruto began actively drawing natural energy from every living thing within his sensory range. The trees surrounding the stadium, the grass in the arena, even the chakra networks of the thousands of people around him, all of it became potential fuel for what he was about to attempt. The transformation was visible from across the stadium. Golden energy erupted around Naruto like a controlled explosion, creating patterns of light that seemed to dance and flow with their own intelligence. His eyes took on the horizontal bar pupils characteristic of Sage Mode. But the energy itself was unlike anything recorded in the historical texts. A perfect fusion of natural power, human chakra, and the subtle influence of tailed beast energy that created something entirely new. "What is that?" Shikamaru breathed, staring at his friend with a mixture of awe and concern. "That," Kakashi said quietly, "is what it looks like when someone achieves perfect balance." But Naruto wasn't focused on the philosophical implications of his transformation. His enhanced senses had revealed the true scope of the invasion. Dozens of enemy squads moving through the village, civilians trapped in buildings that were being systematically destroyed, and a massive summoned serpent approaching from the forest that would devastate entire districts if not stopped. "Senshi," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the stadium itself, "I can coordinate the defense from here. My sensory range covers most of the village." "How is that possible?" Kakashi asked, though he was already preparing to trust his student's assessment. "Natural energy connects all living things," Naruto explained, his consciousness expanded far beyond normal human limits. "I can feel every person in Konoha, sense where the attacks are concentrated, and guide our forces to where they're needed most." What followed was perhaps the most effective coordinated defense in Konoha's history, with Naruto serving as a living command center, his enhanced senses tracking enemy movements and civilian locations simultaneously. The village's defenders were able to respond to threats with unprecedented precision. "3 enemy squads approaching the hospital from the east," he called out to a passing ANBU team. "Medical staff is evacuating to the basement levels. You'll need to clear the stairwells." Civilian shelter in the Academy District is under direct attack, he informed another group. 17 adults, 23 children trapped inside. Attackers are using Earth-style jutsu to bring down the building. The information flow was constant and incredibly detailed, delivered with the calm authority of someone who could perceive the entire battlefield simultaneously. More than one Konoha ninja stopped to stare at the golden figure coordinating their defense, wondering when the loud, unpredictable genin they knew had become this focused tactical commander. But the real test came when the massive summoned serpent finally reached the village proper. The creature was easily the size of a building, its movements causing structural damage with every step as it approached the civilian districts. "I need to stop that thing," Naruto said, his enhanced senses revealing the scale of destruction it would cause if allowed to continue. "Alone?" Kakashi asked, though he was already recognizing that his student's current capabilities might actually make such a confrontation possible. "Not alone," Naruto replied, forming hand seals at superhuman speed. Shadow Clone Jutsu, the technique that followed, defied everything anyone thought they knew about shadow clone limitations. Instead of a few dozen duplicates, hundreds of clones materialized throughout the stadium and surrounding area, each one enhanced by the natural energy flowing through the original. But these weren't normal shadow clones. Each duplicate carried a portion of Naruto's Sage Mode enhancement, giving them physical capabilities and sensory awareness that approached low-level Jonin standards. More importantly, they maintained a constant mental link with the original, creating a distributed intelligence network that could coordinate complex operations across multiple locations simultaneously. "Incredible," someone whispered from the spectator stands, though Naruto was too focused on the tactical situation to identify the speaker. "He's created an entire army of enhanced warriors." The clones spread throughout Konoha like a golden tide, each one moving with purpose and precision towards specific objectives. Some engaged enemy squads directly, their enhanced speed and strength allowing them to neutralize threats that would have required full teams to handle. Others focused on rescue operations, using their sensory abilities to locate trapped civilians and their enhanced physical capabilities to clear debris and create escape routes. But the original Naruto had eyes only for the massive serpent approaching the heart of the village. Drawing on every technique his sage training had taught him, he launched himself toward the creature with speed that created visible shockwaves in his wake. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything the invasion planners had anticipated. Where they expected to face a village defended by scattered individual forces, they found themselves up against a coordinated defense network centered around a single individual whose capabilities seemed to grow with each passing moment. Naruto's battle with the summoned serpent became the focal point of the entire invasion. His sage-enhanced strength allowed him to grapple with a creature that dwarfed most buildings, while his speed let him dodge attacks that would have leveled city blocks. But more than raw power, it was his tactical awareness that proved decisive. The summoner is maintaining the creature from a hidden position, he realized, his enhanced senses tracking chakra flows that led back to a concealed enemy ninja nearly a mile away. Take out the source and the summon disperses. One of his clones immediately broke off from the main battle to pursue the hidden summoner, navigating through the chaos of the invasion with the kind of precision that suggested intimate knowledge of every street and alleyway in the village. When the serpent finally dissipated in a cloud of smoke, leaving only crater-marked streets as evidence of its presence, a cheer went up from the defending forces that could be heard across half the village. But Naruto wasn't finished. His enhanced senses revealed that while the visible invasion was being repelled, Orochimaru and a select group of elite forces had penetrated to the heart of the village, targeting the Hokage directly. "Senshi," he called out to Kakashi, his voice carrying urgency despite his maintained calm, "the third Hokage is in immediate danger. Orochimaru has trapped him in some kind of barrier technique on the roof of the academy." The decision to pursue that threat directly would test every lesson his sage training had taught him about wisdom, power, and responsibility. But as he launched himself toward the center of the village, leaving behind a wake of golden energy and amazed spectators, Naruto felt the quiet confidence that came from knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. The invasion had revealed his capabilities to the world, but it had also demonstrated something more important, that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to know how to protect what mattered most. The real test of his sage training was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the Konoha invasion, and the village bore the scars of that terrible day in both its architecture and its people. But for Naruto Uzumaki, those months had represented the most intensive period of growth and self-discovery in his young life. The revelation of his sage abilities during the crisis had fundamentally altered not just how others viewed him, but how he understood his own place in the world. Standing in the deepest meditation chamber of Mount Myaboku, surrounded by pools of crystal-clear water that reflected the eternal twilight of the Toad Realm, Naruto had achieved something that even Fukasaku had begun to doubt was possible: perfect equilibrium between three distinct energy types. "Breathe," Shima instructed gently, though her voice carried the authority of centuries of teaching experience. "Feel the flow of natural energy, but don't grasp for it. Let it come to you as naturally as air fills your lungs." Naruto's breathing deepened, each inhalation drawing in streams of golden light that seemed to dance around him like living things. But unlike his earlier training sessions, there was no struggle now, no violent fluctuations or dangerous spikes of uncontrolled power. The natural energy flowed into his system as smoothly as water following a familiar riverbed. More remarkably, the Nine-Tails chakra, once a chaotic force that threatened to overwhelm any other energy it encountered, now moved in harmony with the natural power flowing through his network. Months of careful meditation and philosophical study had taught him to view the fox's energy not as an alien intrusion, but as another aspect of the natural world that deserved respect and understanding. "Incredible," Fukasaku murmured, watching the energy patterns swirl around his student with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "The integration is completely stable. No fluctuations, no resistance. It's as if the three energy types were always meant to work together." The moment of perfect balance stretched on, and Naruto felt his consciousness expand in ways that transcended simple sensory enhancement. He could perceive not just the immediate area of Mount Myaboku, but ripples of connection that extended across dimensional boundaries. The faint but persistent link to his own world, the subtle flows of life energy that connected all living things, even the distant presence of other sage practitioners scattered across the shinobi nations. When he finally opened his eyes, the transformation was immediately visible. The golden aura that had characterized his earlier attempts at sage mode now pulsed with deeper, richer colors: orange highlights that spoke to his tailed beast heritage, deep blue undertones that reflected his own spiritual energy, and threads of silver that seemed to connect him to something vast and eternal. But it was his eyes that marked the true achievement. Instead of the simple horizontal bar pupils of traditional sage mode, his gaze held a complexity that reflected the unique nature of his transformation. Orange irises with cross-shaped pupils that seemed to hold depths of awareness that went far beyond normal human perception. "Perfect sage mode," Shima said quietly, her voice carrying a reverence usually reserved for the most sacred moments. "In all our years of teaching, we've never seen an integration quite like this." "How do you feel?" Fukasaku asked, though his experienced eye was already cataloging the subtle changes in Naruto's posture and presence. "Connected," Naruto replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very stones of Mount Myaboku. "Like I can sense every living thing for miles in every direction. But more than that, like I understand their connections to each other, the way energy flows between all forms of life." The philosophical implications of his words weren't lost on his instructors. True sage mode wasn't just about power enhancement. It was about achieving a fundamental understanding of one's place in the natural order. Naruto's transformation suggested that he had grasped concepts that took most practitioners decades to even approach. "Show us what you can do," Fukasaku instructed, gesturing toward the training area where they had spent countless hours working on energy control and integration techniques. What followed was a demonstration that redefined everyone's understanding of what sage mode could accomplish. Naruto's enhanced physical capabilities were immediately apparent: speed that created afterimages, strength that could reshape the landscape with casual gestures, and reflexes that seemed to anticipate attacks before they were even conceived. But it was his sensory abilities that truly amazed his instructors. With his eyes closed, he could track the movement of individual insects across the entire realm, sense the flow of chakra through Fukasaku and Shima's bodies with crystal clarity, and even perceive the dimensional boundaries that separated Mount Myaboku from the human world. "The sensory range is unprecedented," Fukasaku observed as Naruto accurately described events taking place in distant parts of the Toad Realm. "Most sages can extend their awareness perhaps a few miles. You're covering the entire dimension." "It's not just range," Naruto explained, his enhanced perception allowing him to articulate concepts that would have been beyond his understanding months earlier. Its depth. I can sense not just where things are, but how they're connected to each other, what kind of energy they're producing, even their emotional states to some extent. The implications were staggering. A sage with such comprehensive awareness would be nearly impossible to surprise or deceive, capable of coordinating complex operations across vast distances with perfect information about all participants. But perhaps most remarkably, Naruto had achieved something that theoretical studies suggested was impossible: the ability to share his sage mode enhancement with others. "Watch this," he said, placing his hand on Fukasaku's shoulder and carefully channeling a small amount of his perfectly balanced senjutsu chakra into the Elder Toad's system. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Fukasaku's own considerable abilities were amplified far beyond their normal limits, his movements becoming fluid to the point of seeming choreographed, his awareness expanding to match a significant portion of Naruto's enhanced perception. "Extraordinary," the Elder Toad breathed, his voice carrying amazement that spoke to just how unprecedented this development was. "You're not just using Sage Mode, you're sharing it, creating a distributed network of enhanced awareness and capability. The applications are," Shima trailed off, clearly overwhelmed by the tactical and strategic implications of such an ability. "Dangerous," Fukasaku finished grimly. "Knowledge of this capability must be strictly controlled. If word spreads that you can enhance others to near-sage levels temporarily, every military force in the shinobi world will either want to recruit you or eliminate you as a threat." The sobering reminder brought Naruto back to the practical realities of his situation. His achievement was remarkable, but it came with responsibilities and risks that extended far beyond personal power enhancement. "There's something else," he said carefully, his enhanced senses having detected a change in his own chakra network that concerned him. "The transformation feels permanent, like even when I'm not actively using Sage Mode, some part of it is always active now." The two Elder Toads exchanged glances that carried years of shared experience and understanding. "That's not uncommon among the most advanced practitioners," Fukasaku said slowly. "Prolonged use of Sage Mode can create permanent changes to one's chakra network and sensory capabilities. The question is whether those changes represent evolution or degradation." "What's the difference?" Naruto asked, though he suspected he might not like the answer. "Evolution means you've achieved a stable new state of being that enhances your capabilities without negative consequences," Shima explained. "Degradation means you've become dependent on natural energy integration to function normally, potentially losing access to techniques or abilities that don't incorporate senjutsu chakra." "How do we tell which one it is?" "Time," Fukasaku replied simply, "and careful monitoring of how your abilities develop over the coming months. For now, we celebrate your achievement and begin preparing you for the advanced applications that Perfect Sage Mode makes possible." Over the following weeks, Naruto's training shifted from basic energy integration to techniques that had been theoretical possibilities, until his unique transformation made them practical realities. He learned to create Sage Mode-enhanced shadow clones that could maintain their enhancement independently for extended periods, to share his sensory awareness with allies across vast distances, and to manipulate natural energy in ways that went far beyond simple power enhancement. But perhaps most importantly, he began to understand the philosophical weight of his achievements. Perfect Sage Mode wasn't just about becoming more powerful, it was about accepting responsibility for the connections he could now perceive between all living things. "With great awareness comes great responsibility," Fukasaku reminded him during one of their final formal training sessions. "You can now sense the suffering and joy of every living thing within your range. How you choose to respond to that knowledge will define not just your power, but your character." As Naruto prepared to return to his own world, carrying abilities that would reshape how both allies and enemies viewed him, he carried with him a deeper understanding of what it meant to be connected to something larger than himself. The boy who had once dreamed of being Hokage to gain recognition had become something far more significant, a bridge between the human world and the natural forces that connected all life. The question now was whether he possessed the wisdom to use that connection responsibly. Standing on the threshold between Mount Myaboku and his own reality, Naruto took a deep breath and felt the flow of natural energy that would now always be part of him. The real test of his perfect Sage Mode wouldn't be in demonstration of its power, but in how he chose to apply its wisdom in a world that desperately needed both. The emergency mission briefing took place in the Hokage's office just as dawn was breaking over Konoha. casting long shadows across the gathered shinobi who would comprise the Sasuke retrieval team. But unlike the desperate scramble it might have been months earlier, Naruto's presence fundamentally altered both the tactical approach and the likely outcome of their mission. "The situation is this," Tsunade said grimly, her fingers steepled as she studied the assembled genin and chunin before her. "Sasuke Uchiha has defected from the village with the Sound 4, likely seeking Orochimaru to gain power through the curse mark. Your mission is to retrieve him before he crosses into Sound territory." Shikamaru, as mission leader, began outlining the tactical approach they would normally take, pursuit formations, engagement strategies, and contingency plans for various combat scenarios. But his eyes kept drifting to Naruto, whose presence changed every calculation in ways that were both reassuring and concerning. "Naruto," Tsunade said, addressing him directly, "I'm authorizing you to use whatever capabilities you deem necessary to bring Sasuke home safely. The political considerations we discussed regarding revelation of your abilities are secondary to the success of this mission." The permission carried weight that went far beyond simple tactical authorization. In giving Naruto carte blanche to use his perfect sage mode, Tsunade was acknowledging that his capabilities had progressed to the point where he could single-handedly tip the balance of almost any confrontation they might encounter. "Understood, Hokage-sama," Naruto replied, his voice carrying the calm certainty that had become his trademark since achieving perfect natural energy integration. "I won't let Sasuke make a mistake he can't recover from." As the team prepared to depart, Naruto made a decision that would define the entire mission. Instead of following the traditional pursuit formation, he activated his perfect sage mode immediately, his enhanced sensory abilities expanding to cover a radius that encompassed most of the Fire Country. The transformation was as dramatic as ever, golden energy erupting around him in complex patterns, his eyes taking on the unique cross-shaped pupils that marked his hybrid enhancement, and an aura of power that made the air itself seem to hum with potential. "I can sense them," he announced, his consciousness expanding far beyond the normal limits of human perception. "Sasuke and the Sound 4 are moving through the forest approximately 30 miles northeast of here. But there's something else, multiple chakra signatures converging on their position from different directions." "Other pursuing forces?" Shikamaru asked, his tactical mind immediately calculating the implications. "No," Naruto replied, his enhanced awareness revealing details that would have been impossible to detect through normal means. "These signatures are too coordinated, too purposeful. Someone's been tracking their movements and setting up an intercept." The revelation changed everything about their approach. Instead of a simple pursuit mission, they were now looking at a complex multi-party engagement where Sasuke could potentially be caught in crossfire between forces whose motivations they didn't fully understand. "Change of plan," Naruto said, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose sensory capabilities gave him access to information no one else possessed. "I'm going to use enhanced shadow clones to handle the intercept forces while we pursue Sasuke directly." "Enhanced how?" Neji asked, his Byakugan activated and studying the energy patterns swirling around Naruto with fascination. "Sage mode enhancement that maintains independent stability," Naruto explained, forming hand seals at superhuman speed. "Each clone will have capabilities approaching chunin level, with perfect coordination through our shared sensory network." The shadow clone jutsu that followed redefined everyone's understanding of what the technique could accomplish. Instead of the usual dozen duplicates, hundreds of clones materialized throughout the forest, each one glowing with the same golden aura as the original and moving with purpose that suggested individual intelligence rather than simple mimicry. "Incredible," Lee breathed, his dedication to taijutsu making him acutely aware of the physical enhancement each clone displayed. Their speed and coordination, it's like watching a perfect army move as one entity. But Naruto's attention was focused on something his enhanced senses had detected that made his blood run cold. "The curse mark," he said quietly, his voice carrying concern that immediately got everyone's attention. "Sasuke's curse mark is active and the energy signature is wrong. Corrupted in ways that weren't there before." "Wrong how?" Shikamaru asked, though he suspected the answer would complicate their mission significantly. "The curse mark isn't just enhancing his power anymore," Naruto explained, his perfect sage mode allowing him to perceive the flow of corrupted chakra through his teammate system with crystal clarity. "It's changing him at a fundamental level. If this continues much longer, the transformation might become irreversible." The urgency of that revelation drove them forward at speeds that would have been impossible for a normal retrieval team. With Naruto's clones engaging the intercept forces, turning what should have been a complex multi-party battle into a series of isolated skirmishes that his enhanced duplicates could handle independently. The main team was able to pursue Sasuke with single-minded focus. When they finally caught up to their target, the confrontation that followed was unlike anything the Sound Four had prepared for. Facing a team led by someone with perfect Sage Mode capabilities, their carefully planned delaying tactics became exercises in futility. Naruto's enhanced awareness allowed him to predict their techniques before they were fully executed. His speed let him move between multiple opponents faster than they could track, and his strength enabled him to end fights with single decisive strikes that left his enemies unconscious but unharmed. "Sasuke," he called out as the last of the Sound Four fell, his voice carrying across the forest clearing where his teammate stood in the center of a circle of defeated enemies. "We're here to bring you home." But the figure that turned to face them was barely recognizable as their former teammate. The curse mark had spread across most of Sasuke's visible skin, creating patterns that pulsed with dark energy, while his eyes held a cold calculation that spoke to fundamental changes in his personality and priorities. "Home?" Sasuke asked, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested the curse mark's influence extended to his very vocal cords. "Konoha was never my home. It was just a place that held me back from achieving the power I need for revenge." "This isn't power," Naruto replied, his perfect Sage Mode giving him unprecedented insight into the corrupted energy flowing through his friend's system. "It's poison. The curse mark isn't making you stronger. It's making you dependent on borrowed strength that comes with a price you don't fully understand." "And what would you know about power?" Sasuke demanded, though his Sharingan was already spinning as he tried to analyze the golden aura surrounding Naruto. "You've always been the dead last, the failure who needed everyone else's help to accomplish anything." The accusation might have stung months earlier, but Naruto's sage training had taught him to process such emotional attacks without being destabilized by them. More importantly, his enhanced perception allowed him to see through Sasuke's words to the fear and desperation driving them. "You're right," he said quietly, his admission surprising everyone present. "I was weak. I did need help. But the difference between us is that I learned to accept that help, to grow from it, while you're running toward power that isolates you from everyone who cares about you." "I don't need anyone to care about me," Sasuke replied, settling into a combat stance that incorporated techniques Naruto's enhanced senses recognized as sound village training. "I need power, and if you're going to try to stop me from getting it, then you're my enemy." The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most intense confrontations between former teammates in shinobi history. Sasuke's curse mark enhancement gave him speed and strength that far exceeded his normal capabilities, while his Sharingan allowed him to predict and counter many conventional attacks. But perfect Sage Mode represented a level of enhancement that went far beyond what the curse mark could provide. Naruto's movements flowed with the kind of natural grace that made his technique seem less like combat and more like choreographed artistry, while his awareness allowed him to anticipate not just Sasuke's attacks, but the emotional states driving them. "You're holding back," Sasuke snarled as his most devastating combination attack was deflected with minimal effort. "Fight me seriously, or I'll consider you an insult to my time." "I am fighting you seriously," Naruto replied, his voice carrying the kind of sadness that spoke to genuine understanding of what was at stake. "I'm fighting to save you from a path that leads to nothing but isolation and regret." The philosophical difference between their approaches became the defining element of their confrontation. Where Sasuke fought with the desperate fury of someone trying to prove his worth through superior power, Naruto responded with the patient certainty of someone who understood that true strength came from connection rather than isolation. When the final exchange came, it was decided not by superior technique or overwhelming force, but by a moment of perfect understanding. Naruto's perfect Sage Mode allowed him to perceive the exact instant when the curse mark's influence wavered, creating a brief window where his friend's true personality broke through the corruption. In that moment, instead of delivering a crushing defeat, Naruto made a choice that demonstrated the true wisdom his sage training had taught him. He reached out with his enhanced natural energy perception and began carefully disrupting the curse mark's hold on Sasuke's chakra system, not destroying it, which could have killed his friend, but creating enough instability to weaken its influence significantly. "What are you doing?" Sasuke gasped as the dark patterns covering his skin began to fade, the corrupted energy retreating back to its sealed state. "Giving you a choice," Naruto replied, his perfect sage mode allowing him to maintain the delicate energy manipulation even while speaking. The curse mark offered you power at the cost of your freedom. I'm offering you the chance to find your own strength, surrounded by people who believe in you. The decision Sasuke made in that moment, whether to embrace the path his friend offered or continue pursuing the dark power of the curse mark, would define not just his own future, but the entire trajectory of Team 7's relationship going forward. As the golden aura of perfect sage mode faded and Naruto extended his hand toward his former teammate, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether the bonds of friendship could triumph over the allure of corrupted power. The answer would reshape everything they thought they knew about strength, loyalty, and the true meaning of the ninja way. 1 year later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the Hokage monument as Naruto Uzumaki stood on the cliff face overlooking Konoha, his enhanced senses taking in the gentle flow of natural energy that permeated every living thing in the village below. The past year had transformed not just him, but the entire dynamic of the shinobi world, as word of the youngest perfect sage in recorded history spread far beyond the borders of the Fire Country. Behind him, footsteps approached with the measured cadence of someone who had learned to move in harmony with natural forces. Sasuke emerged from the tree line, no longer bearing the corrupted marks of Orochimaru's curse seal, but carrying instead the subtle aura of someone who had found his own path to strength. The council meeting starts in an hour, Sasuke said, settling beside his former rival on the cliff edge. Tsunade wants both of us there for the discussion about the new sage training program. Naruto nodded, his expression carrying the thoughtful gravity that had replaced his once explosive enthusiasm. Any word on the candidates she's considering? 12 from within the village, 8 from allied nations, Sasuke replied. Though Fukasaku made it clear that natural energy sensitivity can't be taught, either someone has the potential or they don't. The conversation carried undertones of changes that went far beyond simple technique instruction. In the year since the Sasuke retrieval mission, Naruto's demonstration of perfect sage mode had fundamentally altered the balance of power between nations. Villages that had once viewed Konoha as merely one player among many now approached diplomatic negotiations, with the understanding that the Leaf possessed capabilities that could single-handedly tip the scales of any major conflict. "Do you ever regret it?" Sasuke asked quietly, his question carrying the weight of their shared experiences over the past months. "Revealing your abilities so completely. The political complications alone, every day," Naruto admitted with an honesty that his younger self would have found impossible. "But then I think about the alternatives. What would have happened if I'd held back during the invasion, or if I hadn't been able to help you break free from the curse mark's influence? The responsibility that comes with power isn't about avoiding consequences, it's about accepting them." The philosophical depth of his response reflected months of intensive study under the Elder Toads, as well as the practical wisdom gained from navigating the complex political landscape his abilities had created. Being recognized as the youngest perfect sage in recorded history brought opportunities, but it also brought expectations and pressures that no 13-year-old should have to bear. "The Akatsuki situation is escalating," Sasuke said, broaching the subject that had dominated their recent missions. "Intelligence suggests they're accelerating their timeline because of your unique capabilities." Naruto's enhanced senses had already detected the increased activity among the organization of missing nin who hunted tailed beasts. His perfect sage mode made him both an unprecedented asset and an unprecedented threat, capable of sensing their movements from vast distances, but also representing a prize that could fundamentally alter their plans for the Nine Tails. "Let them come," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of his former bravado but all of his determination. "My training has taught me that running from threats doesn't make them disappear. It just delays the inevitable confrontation until you're less prepared to handle it." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sakura, who had grown into her role as the team's strategic coordinator and medical specialist with remarkable skill. Her ability to analyze both tactical situations and the political ramifications of their actions had made her invaluable as they navigated increasingly complex missions. "The preliminary reports from the joint training exercise are in," she said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside them. "The results were concerning." "How concerning?" Naruto asked, though his enhanced awareness had already detected the subtle stress patterns in her chakra that suggested significant problems. 8 of the 12 village candidates showed no natural energy sensitivity whatsoever, she replied grimly. Of the remaining 4, 3 suffered partial stone transformation during basic integration exercises, and the 4th managed only the most rudimentary level of energy absorption. The implications were troubling but not unexpected. Perfect Sage Mode wasn't just a technique that could be taught through traditional training methods. It required a combination of natural aptitude, philosophical understanding, and circumstantial factors that couldn't be replicated on demand. "What about the allied nation candidates?" Sasuke asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Similar results but with additional complications," Sakura said carefully. 2 of the candidates from the Stone Village showed signs of what Fukasaku called hostile resonance. Their chakra signatures actively rejected natural energy integration. The medical implications suggest they may have been exposed to techniques or substances that fundamentally altered their energy systems. "Orochimaru's experiments," Naruto said grimly, his enhanced senses having detected similar corruption patterns in several enemy ninja they'd encountered over the past year. "He's been trying to create artificial Sage Mode through forced chakra manipulation." The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. If Orochimaru was successfully creating corrupted versions of Sage abilities, it could destabilize the careful balance that Naruto's legitimate training had established. "There's something else," Sakura continued, her expression growing more serious. During the training exercises, several of the candidates reported unusual dreams. Visions of a figure they described as an ancient sage calling them to some kind of gathering place. Naruto felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. His perfect Sage Mode had made him aware of connections between practitioners that went far beyond simple technique sharing. But the idea of some external entity attempting to contact potential sages was deeply concerning. "Have you mentioned this to Fukasaku?" he asked, already suspecting what the Elder Toad's response would be. "He wants to meet with you immediately," Sakura confirmed. Both he and Shima seemed genuinely worried, which is not reassuring. As they prepared to head to the summoning circle that would take them to Mount Myaboku, Naruto found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as accidental training in natural energy manipulation had evolved into something that touched every aspect of their lives and missions. "Whatever we're facing," he said as they formed the familiar hand seals for the summoning technique, "we face it together." "That's what teams do, even when the team includes someone with godlike abilities," Sasuke asked with the kind of dry humor he'd developed since overcoming the curse Mark's influence. "Especially then," Sakura replied firmly. "Power without friendship becomes tyranny. Friendship without power becomes helplessness. Balance is what makes us stronger than the sum of our parts." Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had watched her teammates grow from promising genin into individuals whose capabilities could reshape the shinobi world. But more importantly, they reflected the core truth that all their training and experience had taught them. That individual strength meant nothing without the connections that gave it purpose and direction. As the smoke of the summoning technique enveloped them, carrying them toward whatever revelations awaited in the Toad Sage realm, Naruto felt the quiet confidence that came from knowing he was exactly where he belonged. The path of the perfect sage was complex and often dangerous, but it was his path, chosen consciously and walked with the support of those who mattered most. The boy who had once dreamed of becoming Hokage to gain recognition had discovered something far more valuable, the understanding that true strength came not from standing above others, but from lifting them up alongside you. Whether facing corrupted sage experiments, ancient entities attempting to manipulate new practitioners, or the ever-present threat of the Akatsuki, he would meet each challenge with the wisdom his training had taught him and the bonds his friendship had forged. The sage's path continued, leading toward horizons that promised both incredible power and profound responsibility. But for the first time in his life, Naruto walked that path not as someone seeking to prove himself, but as someone who understood that the journey itself was the destination. The real test of perfect Sage Mode wasn't in its demonstration, but in how wisely it was used, a lesson he would carry forward into whatever challenges awaited in the world beyond Konoha's protective borders. And that's a wrap on Naruto's incredible journey from accident-prone genin to the youngest perfect sage in history. From that chaotic first encounter with the Elder Toads to completely changing how the ninja world sees power itself. What a transformation. Which moment hit you hardest? Naruto's golden aura during the invasion, that philosophical showdown with Sasuke? Drop your thoughts below. I love hearing what resonates with you guys. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this deep dive, and let me know what other what-if scenarios are bouncing around in your head. The Naruto universe has endless possibilities. Catch you in the next one.